Welcome back to Ready for Merge, the podcast about the evolution of Bitcoin and Ethereum. It's nice to be back doing another bi-weekly brief. I want to give a little bit of a recap of what was going on with the Ready for Merge podcast over the last 2 weeks. And the previous 2 episodes were basically episodes about the backstory of 2 full-time Ethereum developers, about Preston Van Loon and Mark Mackey's journey into working on Ethereum. Usually I try and do the guest episodes every other week, but it just so happened that I did 2 of these Meet the Devs episodes back to back. And now, finally, back today with an update on Bitcoin and Ethereum protocol development from yours truly. So I am, on today's show, going to just give a quick overview of what the main developments have been since the last time I did one of these briefs, on what's going on with Ethereum development, what's going on with Bitcoin, what are the code changes ready for merge, how are these code bases evolving? And the key topics for today's show are going to be the upcoming Ethereum upgrades, Glamsterdam and Hegota. So we're going to talk about the status of these upgrades, how development progress is going, and then we'll also get into Bitcoin Core v31. So that is the next major release of the Bitcoin Core software, client software, that's going to be coming out in about 2 weeks' time. So yeah, thanks for joining again. This is another live recording, another live broadcast. And I hope that anyone who's watching this live, you guys can take advantage of the live feature. Please do ask questions throughout the episode, if you have any, in the chat. I'll be trying to monitor the chat as I go along. So if you have any questions, please do drop those there. Let's get started. Let's get started today with the Ethereum development updates first. So Ethereum developers are primarily working on an upgrade called Glamsterdam. And Glamsterdam, as a bit of a refresher, is an upgrade that is all about scaling. It's all about trying to make it more people to use the blockchain, to be able to use the blockchain in a cost-effective way. Historically, the Ethereum blockchain has reached bottlenecks in when there's like an increase in usage, a lot of users that are sending transactions, transaction fees kind of skyrocket, and the Ethereum blockchain gets bogged down with too many pending transactions. So Glamsterdam is really an upgrade that's all about scaling that protocol, scaling the world computer, so to say, so that it can handle more users at once. And there are two main features for Glamsterdam that developers are working on. They're working on ePBS and balls. ePBS stands for Enshrined Proposer Builder Separation, and balls stands for Block Level Access Lists. ePBS is about making it less computationally intensive to be a block proposer on Ethereum. So there are these special actors that have the ability to take transactions from the pending mempool, so any unconfirmed transactions, any transactions that users are sending to Ethereum, and package them into blocks and validate them and process them on chain. And historically, this activity of block processing and validation has been very computationally intensive. For Ethereum, since it transitioned into a proof of stake blockchain, it has a block format, a block type that is actually a block within a block. So there's a part of the Ethereum block that has all of the user transactions, and that validating that part of the block is usually a very computationally intensive process for these actors called validators. But then that part of the block is actually enveloped and packaged around another part of the block, which is called the consensus. The consensus part. There's the execution block part of the block and the consensus part. Also sometimes referred to as the payload, the consensus payload and the execution payload. And what ePBS does is it separates out the processing of the execution payload from the consensus payload, so that there's more time that validators have to do the work of validating and making sure that all of the transactions that are included in an Ethereum block are valid and won't break the network or break any of the rules of the Ethereum protocol. So ePBS will basically allow for for validators to use up less resources when they're securing Ethereum, when they're validating Ethereum blocks and progressing the Ethereum blockchain. And you can think about the software that validators use. Another term for them is called nodes. And you can just basically think of these as computers. And there's a certain minimum requirement that you need for your computer, be it the memory or the processing ability of that computer and the bandwidth required, the internet connection that you have to just actively be a validator. And all of these validators get rewards for what they're doing. And through ePBS, the activity of being a validator, of running a node on Ethereum, will become less computationally intense, again, because of the separation between the processing of the execution payload from the consensus payload. That is really the gist of ePBS. For block level access lists, this is all about parallelizing just specifically the part of transaction processing. So when validators are verifying transactions in a block, there are certain transactions that depend on one another, and there are other transactions that have absolutely no dependency with a different transaction that's being included in a block. So those, if there's no dependency, then validators could actually process those two transactions in parallel rather than one after the other. So this is trying to introduce more efficiency in the transaction validation process. And ePBS and balls combined will ideally, and the end goal of it really is to allow for developers to more safely increase the block gas limit. This is basically just the size of the Ethereum block. How many transactions can validators be able to package into a block at any given point? Right now, it's something around the measurement of, I believe it's 60 million gas. Gas is just a unit of account on Ethereum that measures how computationally intensive it is to process a block, or the maximum amount of transactions that can be included in a block. And the idea is to increase that number and thereby scale Ethereum. But of course, if you're going to do that and you don't actually implement any features that make it more efficient to run an Ethereum node, then all of the validators will have to buy more expensive hardware, more performant hardware. And that could leave out certain validators from being able to participate in progressing the Ethereum blockchain. So the idea is that ePBS and balls will just make Ethereum validating software more efficient, and will allow developers to safely increase the block gas limit without also increasing basically the node requirements of Ethereum. That is the gist of what Glamsterdam is and what it does for Ethereum. The current state of development for Glamsterdam is basically that ePBS and balls, the entire Glamsterdam upgrade, is in development. Developers are making progress on it, but I'd say developers are still pretty far away from being ready to activate it or roll it out on mainnet, on Ethereum mainnet. One of the developers that's really close to the Ethereum upgrade process and timeline, who's working on it on a week-to-week basis. His name is Barnabas. You'll hear him a lot on the developer calls that I cover on a weekly basis. He works for the Ethereum Foundation on the ETH Panda Ops team. He recently posted and responded to a question because somebody was asking in the developer Discord, when is Glamsterdam going to be ready? And Barnabas said a realistic timeline for Glamsterdam's readiness is sometime in August, September. So that's one estimation for when these changes are going to be ready. But as some of my listeners will know from previous episodes where I've had Ethereum developers who are working on Glamsterdam and working on the next upgrade after Glamsterdam, Hegota, as well. You'll know from prior episodes that the estimation from other developers in Ethereum that's also close to the process, they say that Glamsterdam could potentially be ready sometime in 2027, next year. So all that to say, I'd say, from my personal opinion, I think it's too early. It's too early to say what a realistic timeline for implementation, for activation is going to be for Glamsterdam when it's actually going to hit Ethereum mainnet. I am more on the conservative side. for recurring listeners, they'll know that I'm a bit more on the, you could say, pessimistic side too. For timelines, I think that Ethereum developers historically have been they've been very optimistic, too optimistic about their timelines. And I've noticed that while developers are working on ePBS and balls, and they've made a lot of progress on these two features, they haven't actually gotten started on the other half, I would say, of EIPs and features that they said they really wanted to include in the upgrade. They're waiting for ePBS and balls to be more stable before they start working on the other more minor features. And I think that's going to take time and work on these other EIPs, these other proposals in the Glamsterdam upgrade. That hasn't, it started a little bit, but it hasn't really it hasn't really gotten going, especially on the consensus layer side. All of the proposals aside from ePBS, that none of the proposals have gotten started. All of the testing is being dedicated to ePBS. And there's about like 4 or 5 other features that developers do want to include in the upgrade. Yeah, so the current state of Glamsterdam is that development work is ongoing, and when it'll be ready, when it'll be finished, still unclear. I wanted to give an update on the Hegota upgrade as well. So developers are working on Glamsterdam primarily, but in parallel, they are also planning out the upgrade after Glamsterdam Hegota. And what does Hegota do? Well, Hegota, we know, and what developers have agreed on, should partially help Ethereum's censorship resistance by ensuring that it's not block builders, third-party block builders, that have all the say in what transactions get prioritized in an Ethereum block. Validators, the specialized actors that I was just talking about, who's running software, helping validate the Ethereum blockchain, validating transactions and blocks. They also should get a say on what transactions get included into an Ethereum block. And third-party block builders, they're a smaller set of actors, a smaller number of people are block builders, and they require far more specialized skills than even validators. So the idea is that you're trying to decentralize the responsibility of transaction inclusion and ensure that there's no capture, there's no ability for block builders, if they were to start to try and censor transactions out of the Ethereum pending pool of transactions, the public mempool, they won't be able to do that because validators now will have a say on what transactions must be included in a block. And that proposal is called Fossil. It's called Fork Choice Enforced Inclusion List, and it's all about enforcing and strengthening Ethereum censorship resistance. That's the focus of the Hegota upgrade. But it's only part of the focus, because developers are also still, the current state of the Hegota discussions is that developers are still talking about what else, what other major features should Hegota be focused on. Glamsterdam is a very scaling, focused upgrade. What should Hegota be focused on? One of the leading proposals or candidates is called Frame. And Frame is a proposal that implements a general framework for supporting any type of transaction validation, cryptography, and gas payment on chain. So all user-controlled accounts on Ethereum, they're secured through something called ECDSA cryptography. Elliptic curve digital signatures is, I think, part of the acronym. But basically, it's not really a way to access your account that most mainstream users will be familiar with. This is the classic private public key cryptography, where you have a jumble of numbers and letters to represent your account. And you've got a seed phrase, a private seed phrase that only you should know, that's going to be able to unlock your account and be able to initiate transfers in and out of your account. And the seed phrase are like 12 words that you want to write down on a piece of paper, but you don't want to leave it anywhere that you could, that a hacker could potentially get to on your computer or whatnot. It's not a familiar way, I would say, for most people to be able to secure their accounts. We're more under, there's a lot of people now, we're thinking of just like usernames, like your email address, and then maybe a password that you use a password manager to access, or a password that you can remember well that is, I don't know, unique to you. Is not a lot of people are using private public keys to be able to, or directly to be able to secure their money. So Frame introduces a framework that will allow really any type of cryptography, any type of transaction validation scheme that you'd like to secure your user account. It will also create more flexibility for how you pay for the gas of your, basically the fee associated with any transactions that you're sending through Ethereum, in what form you are paying, making that payment. For user-controlled accounts, it's always up to the users to be able to fund any transactions coming out of that account, but you could potentially have gas sponsorships, so having the funds come from a different account. It introduces a bunch of flexibility that developers and that the Ethereum ecosystem has been asking for years. Another word for it is account abstraction. And because it would be supported by the protocol, the base layer of Ethereum, basically the core protocol of Ethereum that all the node operators are running and using to verify what the rules of interacting with this world computer are, it is oftentimes referred to as native account abstraction. Ethereum developers have had many third-party protocols that do enable more flexibility in the way that user accounts on Ethereum are controlled, but they haven't been native to the protocol. They haven't been defined by the protocol as like a new rule set. It's always been users would, verify transactions through a third-party protocol, through layer 2 or ERC 4337 standard, basically an optional standard, additional set of rules that users can opt into to get account abstraction benefits. But Frame would complete the vision of truly having this kind of flexibility be protocol supported. So that's one of the contenders for Hegota that developers are currently debating extremely heavily. This is the talk of the Ethereum developer community lately. And all of the client teams, of which there are about 12 for Ethereum, these are all different versions of Ethereum software that anyone can run to be able to connect to the Ethereum blockchain and validate the Ethereum blockchain. One of the client teams, Reth, was opposed to having Frame as one of the main features of Hegota. And Reth was really in the minority. At least as of 2 weeks ago, Reth was in the minority opposing Frame. Reth's argument was that Frame is too general. It really doesn't help any particular use case on Ethereum. So for example, one of the arguments for Frame was that, okay, if we introduce this general framework, then it's going to be able to support post-quantum secure signature algorithms and cryptography. And Ethereum wants to get ready for post-quantum computers. Whenever those computers become a thing, it could start to drain funds from Ethereum accounts. So we want to prepare for post-quantum as quickly as possible. That was one of the arguments, but Reth was pointing out, Frame doesn't actually do anything for post-quantum preparation. It creates this general framework, but developers still have to ideate, okay, within this framework, within Frame, how are post-quantum signatures going to be supported? Post-quantum signatures are the cryptography that has been deemed post-quantum safe is extremely computationally intensive. And Frame doesn't really do anything to address the costliness of processing these types of cryptography via the Ethereum blockchain. Another question was, well, Frame is designed to help users be able to get away from ECDSA cryptography, get away from public-private key addresses. Well, what other types of more easily user-friendly cryptography is there, and how would Frame support that? Frame doesn't answer any of those questions. It's just a general framework that allows more flexibility and freedom for the Ethereum community, the broader Ethereum developer community, to develop transaction formats and utilize this new transaction type to ideate themselves. How could this be used? And so Reth's point, the Reth team's point was, if there is a particular use case, if there is a particular idea for what is more user-friendly, then narrowing and simplifying Frame to support just that, narrowing the scope of it to be more targeted to that use case, it's going to help a lot in terms of adoption and pickup for Frame right from the get-go when it's actually activated. So that was the back and forth about 2 weeks ago, and the latest development in the debate around Frame and whether it should be included in Hegota is now 2 other client teams, Nethermind and Aragon, have proposed a competing proposal to Frame transactions called scheme transactions, and scheme transactions addresses one of the critiques around Frame, that it's just too general, and it doesn't actually help or solve the issue of Ethereum's lack of post-quantum security. Scheme transactions is a simpler version of Frame, and it does directly target and ensure that post-quantum style cryptography is more cost-effective to add to Ethereum. And now developers are going to debate. They're going to talk about scheme transactions, they're going to talk about Frame transactions, and hopefully reach a decision on what the main features of the Hegota upgrade should be on this Thursday's all-core developer call. So the next steps for Hegota development is developers are going to get together. They do this every Thursday, but they have a developer call every Thursday. And on this Thursday's call, one of the major agenda items is to make a decision about the Frame feature. So if you are interested in getting an update from me, not in 2 weeks' time, but sooner, on what happened during the Thursday call, be sure to sign up for my Ethereum newsletter, ACD After Hours, which I'll link to in the show notes. That is your update on what's going on with Ethereum development and what changes to be looking forward to coming up on the Ethereum side. Let's get talking about Bitcoin. My Bitcoin development update will be short and sweet, I hope, because I don't have that much to update everyone on when it comes to Bitcoin development this week at least. But Bitcoin, on the Bitcoin side, I would say the biggest update is that Bitcoin Core V31 is getting ready. It's almost time. It's almost time for Bitcoin node operators to upgrade their machines, upgrade their nodes. The word node, it's when I say Bitcoin nodes, I really mean the exact same thing, but in the Bitcoin context. As I was talking about with Ethereum nodes, this is software. These are computers that are connecting to Bitcoin, validating the Bitcoin blockchain, and processing transactions. And for Bitcoin, there is one primary software, one primary client that is used by the majority of Bitcoin node operators. It's called Bitcoin Core. And Bitcoin Core is gearing up for another major release in 2 weeks' time. So the last I checked, the timeline for Bitcoin Core V31 is that they want to release it and make it production ready and fully out to the public by April 10th, which is really coming up. The unique thing to note about Bitcoin Core v31, well, I shouldn't say unique thing to Bitcoin Core v31, but just unique to Bitcoin development and very different from Ethereum development, is that all of the code changes that are being included in v31 are backward compatible changes. They are not consensus changes. They don't change the core rule set of Bitcoin at all. So the way that Bitcoin software works, what kind of transactions are considered valid and invalid, none of that is going to change. All of these are optimizations that will ideally make it easier and more secure for Bitcoin node operators to run Bitcoin Core software. And these are all optional changes. So when we think about the pickup for this v31 release, it's going to happen in a very gradual way. Bitcoin node operators have absolutely no time crunch to adopt this v31 release and its changes. They have all the time in the world to review it, see if some of these changes are things that they want in their software and that they could utilize, and then upgrade from prior whatever version of Bitcoin Core they were running to v31. So if you are a Bitcoin node operator, here are some of the highlights for what the v31 release includes, and you can decide for yourselves whether or not you want to run it. The first kind of interesting feature for Bitcoin Core v31 is some privacy improvements. So if you are broadcasting your transaction from your Bitcoin node, you want to get it included in a block, but you don't want to send it directly into the public mempool, so the public storage space for unconfirmed transactions, unconfirmed Bitcoin transactions. Now there's going to be a feature in Bitcoin Core v31 where you have a private broadcast option. So you can first send your transaction through a privacy network like Tor or I2P. I2P, I think. I don't use this privacy network or any of these privacy networks, to be quite honest. But there are these privacy networks that users can use to send their transaction through first before it hits the public Bitcoin mempool, and that will help mask your transactions origins, trying to strengthen the privacy characteristics of using Bitcoin, of transacting through Bitcoin. There's also a few security improvements in Bitcoin Core v31. One of them helps with diversifying your node's peer connection. So the way that Bitcoin nodes view transactions and the way that Bitcoin nodes stay up to date with what's going on, the latest Bitcoin block. They're getting all that information from peering, from connecting to other Bitcoin nodes and seeing what kind of information they have, and sharing information about what the Bitcoin network is seeing. And one of the concerns around Bitcoin node peering is something called an eclipse attack, where if your Bitcoin node is connecting to peers for the first time, maybe they connect to a bunch of malicious nodes. And these nodes withhold information from you about certain pending transactions or certain blocks that they're receiving. And as in your node, because it's connected to all of these malicious peers that's controlled by one entity, you just don't realize that your Bitcoin node isn't actually seeing a very accurate view of what's going on in the Bitcoin network. So to address this and to ensure that Bitcoin node peering happens in as diversified a way as possible, you're connecting to Bitcoin nodes that perhaps have all different internet providers or are using at different internet providers. There's something called an embedded ASMAP, additional network mapping data that will become a default in Bitcoin Core v31 that will be embedded into that version of Bitcoin Core release onwards. It's called, I hope I'm saying it right, but an ASMAP. It's basically additional data that will be included in the software, in the Bitcoin Core software, to help encourage a diversification of peer connections, node peer connections. And finally, another pretty cool feature of Bitcoin Core V31, which we have discussed a lot on this show in prior biweekly briefs, is of course the cluster mempool feature. This has been a feature multi-year initiative where now Bitcoin nodes will have more advanced reasoning about unconfirmed transactions, about pending transactions in the Bitcoin public mempool. So Bitcoin nodes will be able to better identify transaction dependencies. So by including one transaction in a Bitcoin block, these other two transactions also need to be included. Or if this one transaction fails, then that means these other three transactions will also fail in the block. This also results in better fee estimations for how much value a Bitcoin block will be for a miner that is proposing that block. Basically, miners are the block proposers on Bitcoin. For Ethereum, we call the block proposers validators. We're not going to go get into the particular differences between miners and validators on this episode, but if you are curious, just I don't know, drop something in the chat or the comments of this episode, and maybe I'll dig deeper into it in a future episode. So anyways, that's the cluster mempool feature. It will allow Bitcoin nodes to have some more advanced logic and reasoning about unconfirmed transactions in the public mempool, and more efficiently be able to identify and discard transactions that are of lower priority than the transactions that are of higher priority. A major update to Bitcoin mempool design. So that, I would say, are the highlights of the Bitcoin Core V31 release. There's a couple of other features that I won't get into in today's episode for the sake of time. But if you are curious about some of these other features, I did a write-up of all the main features of Bitcoin Core V31 in my Bitcoin newsletter, BTC Before Light. And I'll link to that newsletter in the show notes of today's episode. So if you're interested, be sure to check that out. Let's talk a little bit about the state, what developers are actually doing about Bitcoin Core V31 now that it's getting pretty close to its final release date. All of the development work for these features are done. Developers are not really working on Bitcoin Core V31 anymore because it's in such a final state. All of it is about testing and retesting the release to really make sure that there's no bugs, no parts of the release that are unpolished. And developers have pushed out the release candidate, the first release candidate for V31. And this is kind of like the version of okay, here Bitcoin Core V31 is, and it's near final state, opening up testing to the broader Bitcoin developer community. So node operators can run Bitcoin Core V31 release candidate version 1 and start testing it out. Start seeing if there's anything that doesn't work or anything that still needs polishing. If you are a Bitcoin developer and you want to take part in helping secure Bitcoin and taking part in the evolution of Bitcoin, you are welcome to just review that release candidate, release that finished work, almost finished work, and provide any comment and feedback on it. That's really what Bitcoin developers are up to when it relates to V31. They're not doing any active development work. They've just pushed it out now and are waiting for feedback on the design and just to make sure that everything about that release is good to go. So I'll link to the release candidate, the announcement about the V31 release candidate for any of the developers that are listening to this show and are interested in taking a look at it. Developers, since the work on V31 is pretty much done, developers are already starting to work on V32. So that will be the next major Bitcoin Core release. Bitcoin Core developers do about 2 major releases of their software per year. And the primary focus of the Bitcoin core developer meetings, which also happens on Thursdays, and I also cover, most of that talk now in those meetings is about V32 and V32 features. I recently talked about V32 features and all the PRs and all the GitHub issues and discussions that are going on for that in my Bitcoin newsletter again. We're not going to go into it in today's episode, but if you are interested, I'll link to it in the show notes as well. One quick takeaway before I start wrapping up the show for today is a pretty interesting difference between Bitcoin core development and Ethereum is the way that they ship upgrades and the way that they evolve the code base. For Bitcoin core, drink of water. The chat is very quiet today. I hope there's a little bit more chatter. I don't know, maybe once the episode is out. Usually I get at least a couple of questions. Please ask questions if you have any for the live broadcast today. But anyways, so one quick takeaway that I just want to highlight around the way that the Bitcoin protocol is evolving versus the way that Ethereum protocol is evolving is primarily because Bitcoin Core is the primary implementation, the primary code base, the primary software that node operators are running. All of the changes that are happening in Bitcoin Core are happening on a more predictable timeline. For Bitcoin Core, anytime there's a feature that is ready to go, ready to ship, it will be included in the next major release. So any features that were ready to ship, say last December, developers immediately included that into V31. But there are some features that developers have been working on for years, but have not been ready for activation or implementation on Bitcoin mainnet, on a formalized final release of Bitcoin Core. And for Bitcoin developers, the way that they work on changes, if it's not ready for a particular major release, it's okay. Whenever it's ready, it'll just go in the next major release. So in that sense, developers are working on a very predictable timeline. The Bitcoin ecosystem knows that there's going to be a new Bitcoin Core release roughly every 6 months. And anytime there's a feature that is being debated or scoped, there is some talk about when is this feature going to be ready, but it doesn't impact the major release timeline. And also all of the Bitcoin Core developers, they're all working on Bitcoin Core. They're all working on the same code base. They're working on the same repository. For Ethereum, the timeline for upgrades is extremely unpredictable. While developers are trying to be more strict with their cadence, trying to upgrade Ethereum every roughly 6 months, just like Bitcoin Core does, the dynamics are completely different. Because for Ethereum, as I mentioned earlier in this show, there's more than 10 clients, which means there's more than 10 disparate code bases and developer teams that are all trying to coordinate the same feature or decide on the feature timeline and the upgrade timeline. So coordination is significantly harder, and testing between all of these different code bases and all of these different variations for how a feature is implemented on Ethereum, that is far more complex. So for Ethereum, when I talk about the Glamsterdam timeline, it's hard to predict exactly when Glamsterdam is going to be ready, because we're not talking about the readiness of one team and the readiness of one code base. We're talking about the readiness of 10 plus development teams and code bases, which is also why I think for Ethereum developers, there is a lot more urgency about getting a particular feature in an upgrade because there's less trust that if there's a particular upgrade that doesn't make it into Glamsterdam, we're not exactly sure when the Hegota upgrade is going to be ready. So it could be years before we see this feature go live if it doesn't get into the next immediate upgrade. Whereas for Bitcoin Core, there is not very much pressure for Bitcoin Core developers to really try and make sure that a feature is ready now or discuss upgrade scoping. There's not as much riding on the upgrade scoping part of the consensus process, of the governance process, because if in the process of upgrade scoping a feature doesn't make it in, it's not ready, there's more assurance in the timeline that, okay, well, at least I know that if I can get it ready for the next upgrade, that's going to be about 6 months, so I can get it in then. Whereas for Ethereum, it's a bit more complex, and the timeline for upgrades is more unpredictable. There are some other kind of caveats that I would also add regarding assurances of whether or not a feature will go in. Just getting approval for features for Bitcoin Core, depending on the backwards compatibility of your feature, depending on other aspects of your feature, there's a much higher probability that Bitcoin Core developers will be interested in the feature versus not, and for Ethereum it's a little different. So there's other dynamics at play, of course, when it comes to consensus, but I think based on today's updates on the way that Ethereum and Bitcoin Core development is progressing, I just want to highlight why it is that timelines for Bitcoin Core are so much more predictable than for Ethereum. A little bit about next week's show and what to expect on next week's show. Next week's show is going to be a guest episode, which means that it will be a little bit longer probably than today's episode. And it's going to be the first Dev Talk episode that I have a roundtable discussion with non-developer guests. So Dev Talk is a mini series of Ready for Merge, the Ready for Merge podcast, where I bring on subject matter experts about a particular topic on either Bitcoin or Ethereum protocol development. And it's usually 2 guests, and we just discuss that particular subject. Up until now, every single guest that I've had have all been protocol developers, but this is going to be the first episode where I actually bring on some event organizers. So Charlie Spears from Blockspace Media and Nifty Nay from Bitcoin Plus Plus are both coming on the Ready for Merge podcast to talk about the Bitcoin developer focused conferences that they are organizing this year. They're going to talk about what are the main narratives and topics that they think are most relevant to the Bitcoin Core developer community, not just Bitcoin Core, the client, but also just Bitcoin development at large, other aspects of interesting Bitcoin projects and Bitcoin. I'm trying to think of a synonym for Bitcoin development, but basically other types of programming and other types of cool, interesting software projects that are being built on top of Bitcoin Core protocol. And that's going to be happening next week. A little bit of details about the recording, so you can mark it on your calendars if you're interested in tuning in, which I hope you are. It is going to be another live recording, another live episode, so you can tune in with your questions too if you'd like. It's going to happen at the same time as today's episode. The live recording will start and kick off at 11 a.m. Eastern Time next week on April 1st. So please do stay tuned for that. That's it for today's episode of Ready for Merge. This was another bi-weekly brief helping you stay ahead of the curve on Bitcoin and Ethereum protocol development. I'm your host, Christine D. Kim. Thank you guys for listening, and I'll talk to you all again next week. Bye, everyone.